Welcome to The Explainer. Every so often, an idea comes along that completely changes the game. Today, we're talking about one of those revolutionary ideas in psychology, from a guy named Carl Rogers that didn't just reshape therapy, it also totally transformed how we think about teaching and learning. Okay, here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll look at the world Carl Rogers walked into and turned upside down. Then we'll break down his big idea, these 3 core conditions for growth. We'll see what the ideal outcome of all this looks like. Then we'll see how it applies to the classroom, and finally we'll talk about why this is still so important today.
So, let's set the scene. Back in the mid-20th century, psychology was pretty much dominated by 2 heavyweights. You had Freud's psychoanalysis, which was all about our hidden, unconscious desires, and then you had Skinner's behaviorism, which basically said we are what our environment conditions us to be. Both kind of suggested we're just puppets, right? Pulled by strings we can't even see. But then, something new started bubbling up. And that something was called humanistic psychology, and Carl Rogers was right at the forefront. It was so different they called it the third force. It just completely flipped the script. Instead of focusing on what's wrong with people, humanism started with a more optimistic question: what's right with people? Rogers had this radical belief that at our core we're all fundamentally good and have this powerful built-in drive to be our best selves.
So what was this big idea at the heart of his theory? Well, Rogers believed that every single living thing, and I mean everything, from a tiny seed to a human being, is driven by one single basic motive.
He called it the actualizing tendency. And honestly, this flower analogy is the perfect way to get it. Rogers' whole point was that people are just like that flower. You don't have to force the seed to grow, you don't have to fix it. It already has all the potential inside. All you have to do is provide the right conditions, the psychological version of good soil, sunlight, and water, and it will naturally, automatically flourish.
But he noticed there's a really common problem that stops this growth in its tracks. It's this gap, this disconnect, between our real self, that's who we actually are deep down, and our ideal self, that's the person we think we should be, usually based on what others expect from us. You know that feeling, when you have to put on a mask to fit in? That's the gap he's talking about. And that gap creates anxiety and stops us from growing. So that leads us to the million-dollar question, doesn't it? What are those right conditions? What is that psychological sunlight and water that helps us close that gap and really start to thrive? Well, Rogers boiled it all down to 3 absolutely essential ingredients that need to be in any relationship for growth to happen. And here they are, the big 3. This is the foundation of his entire way of thinking. And it's not some complex technique, it's about being genuine and real with someone, no masks. It's about acceptance, what he called unconditional positive regard, which just means valuing someone completely without any ifs or buts. And finally, it's about empathy, truly deeply trying to understand their world from their perspective.
Okay, so let's say we get this right. We're in an environment that has these 3 ingredients. What happens then? What's the goal? What does a person who's really growing look like?
Rogers called this the fully functioning person. But here's the most important part. It is not a destination. You don't just arrive one day and get a certificate. It's a process. It's a direction you're heading in. It's about being open to everything life throws at you, good and bad, living right here in the present moment, trusting your gut feelings, and being creative and not afraid to take a few risks.
Now this is where Rogers had a real aha moment. He quickly realized these principles weren't just for a therapist's office. They could be a total game changer for education, which he saw as this incredibly powerful force in shaping who we become.
And just listen to this quote. It's from a student in one of these person-centered classrooms, and it captures the whole idea perfectly. The focus shifts away from the teacher as this expert who just pours knowledge into your head. Instead, the teacher becomes a facilitator, someone who creates the atmosphere where real, lasting learning can actually happen. And this table shows you just how radical that shift is. Think about traditional school. What's priority number 1? Knowledge, facts and figures. Rogers' approach completely flips that pyramid. It says, let's start with positive attitudes. Let's foster curiosity and self-responsibility and a genuine love of learning first. Because if you do that, the skills and the knowledge will follow so much more easily. And hey, this isn't just some feel-good theory. The research actually backs it up. A study looked at a university course that used this model, and guess what they found? Yeah, students gained knowledge for sure, but the biggest gains they reported were in practical skills and, most importantly, their personal attitudes. They weren't just learning what to think, they were learning how to learn and grow as people. So, let's bring it all home.
Why are we talking about an idea from the 1950s? Why does this still matter so much right now for you and for me?
Well, the big lesson is this. The environment is everything. If we want to unlock deep learning, if we want innovation, if we want personal growth, we have to start by creating psychological safety. We have to build genuine human connection. Rogers taught us that the goal isn't just to fill people's heads with information, it's to empower them to take charge of their own learning for their whole lives.
So, we'll leave you with this question to think about. What could really change if our classrooms, our companies, and even our own families were truly built on these simple but powerful principles? Genuineness, acceptance, and empathy. Just imagine the human potential we could unlock. Thanks for joining this explainer.